welcome to this beginner's guide on how to use the basic controls of the SONICWARE Liven Ambient Zero to quickly and easily create some ambient music. To get us going, I'm going to select one of the preset pattern palette templates that the Ambient Zero comes pre-installed with by pressing the pattern button right here and then rotating the value knob until I get to the palette named Lime, and then I'm going to press the OK button. Now, inside any palette, we have 4 layers of sound that we can move between using these buttons here, which on the top are labeled drone, pad, atmosphere, and noise. The red light indicates the layer that we're currently inside, so we're in the drone layer right now, and that sounds like this. If I want to switch layers, I just press the button for the layer I want. So let's go to the pad layer, the light turns red, and that layer sounds like this. Now let's switch to the atmosphere, or Atmos layer, which sounds like this. And finally the noise layer, which sounds like this. So, 4 very different sounds that we are going to be able to layer together. But before we do that, let's go over some of the other basic controls here. So let's go back to the drone layer. Now, within any layer, we can also change the octave that we're playing on the keyboard using these octave buttons here. The button with the left arrow takes us down in octaves, and the button with the right arrow takes us up an octave. When the lights are off on these octave buttons, that means we're in the middle octave, and as we go down, the lights go green, orange, red, and as we go up octaves, the colors do the same thing. Green, orange, red, thus indicating which octave we're in relative to the center octave. And by default, the drone layer is set to 2 octaves below the center octave as indicated by the orange color, and I'm going to leave it there for now. Now, because we're using a template, we have some nice sounds that have already been created for us. If we wanted to create sounds from scratch or make significant changes to the ones in the template, we'd use these brown knobs up here. These knobs control the underlying synth engine and the various structures and parameters with which it can be configured. But we'll take a look at all of those in another video focusing on sound design. In this video, we're going to focus instead on how we can take the sounds that are already available to us and then do different things with them by using these light gray knobs and these buttons down here. Now, on the Ambient Zero, many buttons have 2 functions, with the primary function being labeled on the top and the secondary function on the bottom. So for example, this button here has a primary function of taking us to the first step in the sequencer, which we'll look at in another video. But it has a secondary function of letting us choose the filter type, as indicated by the label down here, that we want to apply to the layer that we're in, which is currently the drone layer. To access this secondary function, all we have to do is press and hold this function button right here, and then press the button that we want to use. The screen will then show us the current setting. So this is telling us that the drone layer currently has a low pass filter being applied to it. Now, if we switch over to the Atmos layer and then we do the same thing, so holding function and then this button right here, we can see that this layer has a band pass filter applied to it. And so different layers can have different filters applied to them. Now, if we want to change the setting, there are 2 ways of doing that. We can either hold down the function button and press that filter type button again, and again, and again, or we can simply rotate the value knob. And we have 4 options to choose from: low pass filter, high pass filter, band pass filter, and off, meaning no filter at all. Now I'm going to switch this to a low pass filter, and once I get to the setting that I want, I can just leave it there. I don't need to exit the setting and I don't need to save it. The setting gets immediately applied. Now, with any given filter, we have 2 parameters that we can control, and they are controlled by these 2 knobs up here. And the primary parameters that these or any knobs control is labeled on top of the knobs. So these knobs control the filter cutoff and the filter resonance. Now, if we take the knob that controls the cutoff frequency, if we turn the value of this parameter down while playing some sound, the frequency at which the sound gets cut off and filtered becomes lower and lower until we stop hearing the sound almost entirely. Conversely, as the value of this parameter goes up, the cutoff frequency goes up and we hear more and more sound since more of the spectrum is coming through. Resonance basically controls how much we're emphasizing the frequencies near the cutoff point. The lower the value, the less we're emphasizing them, and the higher the value, the more we're emphasizing them. And you can really hear the emphasis of the resonance if you put it at a high value and then slowly move the cutoff frequency using the other knob to create a filter sweep. So that's a low pass filter. A high pass filter works in much the same way, only it lets through the high frequencies instead of the low frequencies of the sound. And then a bandpass filter is a little bit different. The knob labeled cutoff now controls the band of frequencies that we're letting through the filter. And the knob labeled resonance controls how wide that band is. Now, just like a lot of the buttons on the Ambient Zero, a lot of the knobs also have secondary functions, or in other words, secondary parameters that they control. Those secondary parameters are labeled below the knobs. So these two knobs that we just looked at have a secondary function of controlling the amplitude envelopes, attack, and release parameters. And to change the values of these secondary parameters using these knobs, what we do is we press this shift button right here and then turn the knobs. Alternatively, if you don't want to have to keep holding down this button, what you can do is press the shift button and the function button simultaneously, and then the shift will be held for you as indicated by this orange light. And then to turn off the shift hold, all you have to do is press the shift button again, and the light goes off. Now I'm going to put that hold back on, and now with the shift engaged, I'm going to turn this knob to take the attack parameter value all the way down to 0, and I'll do the same thing with the release parameter value and turn that to 0 as well. When these two values are at 0 and I press one of the keys on the keyboard, we're going to immediately hear the full sound of this layer the moment I press the key, and then the sound stops the moment I let go of it. In contrast, if we take the attack parameter value and turn that up a little bit, now the sound is going to gradually fade in to a greater or lesser extent, depending on how high we make this value. And so at the maximum value, which is 127 for this and all of the other parameters, we can have a very slow and gradual buildup of our sound. Now, I'm going to set that back down to 0 so we can look at release, which works the same way on the opposite end of the sound, at the end or release of the sound. So if I turn this parameter value up and I press a key and I let go, the sound gradually fades out instead of disappearing immediately. And we can do that to a greater or lesser degree depending on where we set the value. And as you can hear, we're not even at the maximum value, and yet we have a very, very long release. Whereas if we go back to, let's say, 15, it's a very short release, but still a little bit longer and less sudden than turning the value to 0. Okay, these next two knobs control the first and second LFOs, but we're going to skip over these in this video and come back to them in the sound design video. The next knob's primary control is for the volume level of our layer. If I want to use the knob to control that, I need to remember to come back and turn the shift hold off by pressing the shift button. And now I can use this knob to increase or decrease the volume of this layer. And let's put that back up to a middle value. Now, this same knob has a secondary function of controlling the pan parameter of this layer. So I'm going to turn on a shift hold in order to control that parameter with this knob. And now I can pan this layer to the right, to the left, right down the center, or somewhere in between those extremes. The next knob's primary function is to control the amount of reverb that's being sent to this layer. To use the knob in that capacity, I'm going to turn the shift hold off, and now I can either increase or decrease the amount of reverb being sent to this layer. And the secondary function of this knob is to control the amount of shimmer that's being sent to the layer. Shimmer meaning reverberations of our sound an octave above the original layer. So turning my shift hold back on, currently I have it off, and if I bring it on, it's going to sound like this. And if I turn my shift hold off, I can go back and add some normal reverb to the sound as well, and get a blend of the two. For me, that's a little bit too much shimmer, so I'm going to hold the shift button and bring that back down. And one thing to note here is that the reverb and shimmer, and in fact all of the parameters we've looked at so far, are independent per layer. So for example, I can leave the reverb settings the way they currently are on this Atmos layer, and then I can pan our sound all the way to the right, and then I'm going to go over to the pad layer, turn the reverb all the way off, turn the shimmer all the way off too, and then pan the sound all the way to the left. And so now our pad layer sounds like this, and our atmosphere layer sounds like this. And so those parameters are completely independent of one another. Now I'm going to quickly reset what I just did. And now we're back to the way we were. Now with the reverb, we also have control over the overall reverb that's being sent to each layer. And we can access this setting by pressing and holding the function button, and then pressing this button here that says reverb type on the bottom. I press it once, and we see that we currently have one of the large reverbs being applied to it. The reverbs come in three main types: small, large, and infinite. And then within each of those types, we have a low, medium, and high version of that reverb. I'm going to leave it here on the infinite high reverb. And then finally, over on this knob here, the one that says reverb on the bottom, this knob has a secondary function of controlling our overall reverb mix. So putting on a shift hold so I can use the secondary function of this knob, if I turn this parameter value to 0, what that means is in our reverb mix, where we have two sides to it, we have a dry side, which is our sound before any reverb gets applied to it, and a wet side, which is our sound after the reverb gets applied to it. At a mix value of 0, we're only going to hear the dry side of our sound. And so if I press a key, all of our reverb has disappeared. Whereas if I take this knob and turn this parameter value all the way to the maximum value, we're only going to hear the wet side of the mix, or in other words, just the reverb. And what that also means is that if I go back to our Atmos layer and take our reverb off for a second, if I play a key, which I'm doing right now, we're not going to hear anything, because with our reverb mix, we're basically saying that we only want to hear reverb sounds, and we're not sending any reverb to this layer. So we'd only begin to hear this layer again if we brought some of the reverb back in. Now, usually with the mix parameter, you're going to want to be somewhere in between those two extremes of 100% dry and 100% wet. So I'm going to bring this back to a value of, let's try 97. And actually, because I've switched this to an infinite reverb, we have a really big reverb now, and I'm going to kind of compensate for that by bringing the mix back a little bit further. Let's try 70. But of course, this is just something you have to do by taste, and it's also something that you can change over the course of playing a piece of music. All right, now I'm gonna actually turn the reverb off completely for a second. So holding down shift and going down to 0 so that I can show you one last thing with the knobs. This same knob that we were using in its secondary capacity to control the reverb, this knob also controls one of the parameters for the effects that we can also apply to our sound. So to choose an effect, we press and hold the function button, and then this button here, which says effects type. And so right now, the option selected is off, and we have a number of choices, including delay, reverse delay, and a few others. But the one I'm going to demonstrate here is delay. So with the delay, this knob here, the one that's labeled speed, is going to control the rate of our delay. So for example, at a middle value, it would sound like this. If I make this parameter value shorter, the speed or rate at which our notes get repeated is going to become quicker. And as the value gets greater, the amount of time between the repeats also gets greater, which is so long that it gives me time to play multiple notes before they start repeating. So that's the speed knob, and then the knob that has the primary label of amount controls the amount of delay we have, or in other words, how many times the output of the delay gets fed back into it, and therefore how many times the notes get repeated. So if I turn this at a very low value, and I'm going to take the rate back to a middle value as well, so at a low value of the amount, the repeats don't go on for very long, whereas if I turn this amount value up, they keep going for a longer and longer period, and at the maximum value, it's just going to keep going and going. And for the time being, I'm just going to turn it off. I'm going to press the Shift button and use this knob to bring our reverb back in, and now we're back to where we were before. Okay, so those are some of the basic ways that we can control our sounds, but of course the whole point of doing that is to be able to play with them in the first place. So let's finish up by taking a look at how to do that. Now, within any layer, you can play the ambient 0 exactly as you would any keyboard instrument. Going back over to the pad. We can get some pretty big sounds, but where the synth really comes alive is when we play 2 or more layers simultaneously. And one way to do that is to make use of the sequencer, which again we'll look at in another video, but an even simpler way is to use the hold function, which is controlled by this button here. If I press and hold down the hold button and then press a key, that note will be held for as long as I want it. If I want to cancel the hold, all I have to do is press this clear button here, hold that down, and then press the hold button again, and the note will go away. Now I can hold multiple notes simultaneously, like this. But I can also add notes to my hold one by one, like this. Not only that, but I can also hold multiple notes from different layers. So for example, I can switch over to the noise layer, hold a note in that layer, switch over to the drone layer, hold a note there, and then add another note from the pad layer. Now, if I want to cancel one of those layers, all I have to do is press clear and then hold. And if I want to cancel all of the layers at once, I press clear and then the play button right here. All right, and then one last thing I want to show you with the hold function has to do with another aspect of the layers that we haven't looked at yet. And to show you this one, I'm going to go back over to the Atmos layer, and then I'm going to press function and this button right here, which says mode voice at the bottom. If I press that button, we can see that our mode that we're currently in inside of this layer is polyphonic, meaning we can play multiple notes at the same time. Now, we have a number of other modes available to us, including monophonic, legato, and unison, all of which only allow us to play one note at a time. So even if I hold down 3 keys at the same time, only one of them is going to sound, whichever one was the last one I pressed. We'll come back and look at these different modes in more detail in the sound design video, but in this one, I just want to show you something real quick with one other mode, which is the arpeggiator. Now with the arpeggiator, if I hold down multiple notes at the same time, what's going to happen is we're only going to hear one note at a time, but we're going to cycle through a series of the notes that I've pressed down, like this. And this is something that we can also hold using our hold button. So press and hold the hold button, press those same keys, and now we're arpeggiating, or in other words, playing notes in a series. And we can add more notes to that series by pressing the hold button again, and then pressing the key we want to add. And then we can stop that in the same way as before. Now, with the arpeggiator, we can also change the pattern or order of the series in which the notes are played. And we can do that by pressing and holding the function button and then pressing this button here, which is labeled adjust. If I press that, we can see that our current order is going up, as in this note, and then this note. But we can change that setting to down, and now we'll go down, this note, and this note. And we have many other options to choose from. The one that I want to use here is the random option. This is going to randomize the order of our notes, and this can be very useful because randomization can be great for creating some melodic atmosphere that's unpredictable and variable. So I'm going to hold the same notes and then add some more. We can even change our octave and hold some notes from that octave as well. And then we can make this randomization even more random by pressing the shift button or putting on a shift hold, and then using this knob here, which has a secondary function marked by this dice icon right here. And what this does is it changes the probability of any given note in our series being played. And so if we switch this to 50, for example, there's a 50% chance of any given note being played. And so now we have some unpredictable rhythmic variety in our arpeggiation on top of the unpredictable note order. We can also change how fast the notes get played by pressing the function button and then this button here, which says note below it. If I do that, we see the current note value. So every single note or skipped note is currently a dotted eighth note. And we can use the value knob to scroll through all of the other possibilities that we have available to us. And we can make the notes as fast as 1/32nd note each. Or we can go as slow as 8 entire whole notes or bars per note. And then keep in mind that how fast the notes get played is also going to depend on your BPM, or beats per minute, which is controlled by this knob here. So at the moment, this is set at 94. We can bring that all the way down to 40. And then all the way up to 250. But I'm going to bring it back down. And then one last thing I want to note about arpeggiation is that the character that you end up getting from this is really going to depend on your attack and release values. So if I turn up the release, the notes start to bleed together. If I turn up the attack, they start to fade in and out. And adding some delay can also really change how this sounds. And I'll cancel that hold. And so now, using that hold function in conjunction with the arpeggiator and manipulating the knobs in the way we've looked at, we can really start to quickly and easily make some ambient music. And I'm going to close this off by doing just that.